Greetings, hello, welcome. Happy day to you all. We hope that you are doing well today. We're glad that you're joining us for this week's exciting episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And our topic today is confronting this nonsense about sitting out the current struggle. Confronting this nonsense about sitting out the current struggle. There is just an endless supply of African people throughout social media making comments about these current conditions in this backward country where the so-called Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, or ICE, as it's more widely known, are going around and they are without question raiding people's houses. Whether they were born here or not is irrelevant. They're doing it. They have a 3,000 person a week quota. So they're even being instructed to kidnapped houseless people, because houseless people typically, as you know, if you think about it, don't carry identification. So it will be impossible for them, if accused of being undocumented, to prove otherwise. So this is the reality that's happening in this backward country. And meanwhile, these Africans are on social media talking about it's not our fight as African people. We should not be involved in it. So we're going to address this nonsense and this confusion today. And can't wait to bust open this um, bit of absolute ignorance about how we should confront any source of injustice in the world today. So glad you're here. We give honor to the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere, the caretakers here. We just, it's unfortunate we just don't know the history of what's happened. There's so much misinformation out here that people just really just have no idea what that is. But we try to address it with as many of these workshops as we can, but there's no getting around. If people don't engage in studying this history for themselves, you're never going to understand it. It's always going to be a source of confusion. So you should do that. You should study the history of indigenous people here. We have a long history with them. They were the only places we could go during slavery years, 350 years of slavery in this society. We would escape the slave plantation because the majority of our people didn't want to cooperate with that. You see today, you see, as Malcolm X told us, house Negroes and field Negroes, and the field ones were the rebellious ones, the ones who were constantly fighting the oppression, who were constantly trying to escape. And as Malcolm told us, the house Negroes were the ones who were like, escape this white man, this good white man? Are you crazy? And there's plenty of house Negroes out here today. A lot of them are on social media. So we owe a debt of honor to the indigenous people. So we honor that. And obviously, we honor those African ancestors who fought, who resisted. They will teach history in this backward capitalist society like we never resisted anything. We always resisted. It's just the thing about it, you all, is it's just like today. Like there's a saying, if you want to know what you were doing during slavery times, during colonial times, look at what you're doing now. And you'll know exactly what you were doing then. Because people, I wouldn't have put up with it. If you, yes, you would have. You put up with it then, just like you're putting up with it now. So stop lying to yourself, because you're not fooling us, right? The people who would do something about it then are the people who are doing something about it now. If you're someone who sits around making excuses for why you're not doing anything, that's what you would have been doing then. There's no evidence to suggest anything different. So we're saying we give honor and respect to the African ancestors who did not do that, who sacrificed and struggled and resisted. And like we always do, we just want to introduce who we are, our ancestors' voices. It's sponsored each week, this program, same time, same place, by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP. And the AAPRP is, again, a revolutionary, independent, mass, pan African political party with its base in Africa. And our objective is Pan Africanism. Pan Africanism. That's what we're fighting for. And this is an objective which is defined correctly as the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. That's our objective. That's what we're fighting for. The total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. We're not voting for Negro Jones to become mayor of this city. That's not our objective. For Negro Jones to become president of the US, that's not what we're fighting for. For Negro Jones to be president of Ghana or Tanzania, that's not our fight. Our fight is not about individuals, it's against systems. It's against systems of oppression. So we want to overturn the backward international capitalist imperialist system and replace it with scientific socialism. And we want to do that in Africa because that's the place where we have the right to do it. That's our natural homeland, our historical homeland. No matter how confused we are out here in the West, it doesn't change that. So that's why we say Pan Africanism is our solution. And our work to achieve Pan Africanism is outlined in a very comprehensive strategy. Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare outlines the strategy to bring about Pan Africanism, and that work is the work that we do every day in the APRP to build what we call the All African Committee for Political Coordination, and then the All African People's Revolutionary Army. And these are the institutions that will bring about, under the direction of an All African People's Revolutionary Party, one unified socialist Africa. So, in other words, if you're running around here today and you're saying, "Well, how many people you got in the APRP?" Then the minute you ask me that question, I know you don't understand our work at all. Zero. You have no understanding of the work that we're doing. So this book, if you study it, especially if you study it with people, it will help you understand conceptually what we're doing in the APRP in 2025 and beyond. And Our Ancestors' Voices is a program sponsored each week by myself, Ajamu, and the doctor, Shakura Umi. So to get us started, I will turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we have much to discuss as we continue to think about how our stories have been navigated, but also unfolded with us. So, first, of course, we acknowledge and realize that there are some things that are just automatically true. And even if we are taught that they are not true, we should then believe that there is reason to believe that there is some mistruth to whatever it is we're not supposed to know. And that's why we should be more curious and more interested in uncovering the truth. So, some of the things, some of the facts we can talk about are understanding that as it relates to indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, there are true, valid, there are two valid statements that just need to be acknowledged that we are not going to compromise on. First and foremost, these lands from Alaska down to Chile and everywhere in between belong to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. Their struggle is one of reclaiming their identity and their dignity, reclaiming their determination and these lands. And indigenous people are, as they define themselves, indigenous, native, Indian, Chicano, Mexican, Puerto Rican, etc. So it is without question that we, as the All African People's Revolutionary Party, take on the position of understanding as high up as Alaska down to Chile and everywhere in between. We understand that that is indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere land. And we also understand that we have a responsibility to support our comrades and reclaiming their identity, their dignity, their determination, and their land. We understand that ownership of land equals power. We understand that we are in a position where we can help them to get their land back, partly by us acknowledging every week that this is in fact indigenous people's land. If you are tuning in to our broadcast, as I said, from as high up as Alaska down to Chile, then continuing to reinforce that information, continuing to resist and decolonize the propaganda that we've been taught. continuing to have conversations where we will openly express that we are proud to support and be in solidarity as allies with the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, always acknowledging that this is their land and more so acknowledging that their struggle is not over and their struggle is continuing. It's also important to note that we are in a very humbled position where not only can we acknowledge that their fight is a part of our fight, which is why we are equipped and interested and vested in fighting with them, but the time has already come where they have already shown up and helped us in our fight as well. And they are continuing to help us in our fight as well. They understand that our struggle is about reclaiming our identity and our dignity. They understand that our struggle means that we need to establish more determination. Some of us have lost hope. Some of us are no longer believing that a difference can occur. Some of us don't believe that change is coming and that it is happening. Some of us are of the mindset that there's nothing that can be done. And some of us are of the mindset that it's easier to accept the capitalist media and way of life than to continue resisting and fighting every single day. But our indigenous comrades who are in organizing spaces where they understand that they are trying to get their land back, they haven't compromised their values and their ideologies. And therefore they understand that our struggle is their struggle. They understand that their struggle is our struggle. And this is why it's so important for us as African people to take this position and to be bold with it, to stand in unison. Personally speaking, it is an oxymoron to me for you to speak about supporting the Palestinian struggle and to not acknowledge that you need to support the indigenous struggle as an African person. And that's assuming that you're sophisticated enough to support the Palestinian struggle. But yet, a lot of Africans are coming around to that. A lot of Africans are coming around to understanding that what is happening to the Palestinian people is outrageous, it is brutal, it is inhumane, and it needs to be stopped. So, why does your outlook look any different with the indigenous people? I would argue if you're taking the position that you think that, what's happening to our people in Haiti, if you take the position and you think about what's happening to our people in the Sahel, any one of those examples could very much also be compared to what is happening to our indigenous comrades of the Western Hemisphere. And they're all our indigenous comrades because as we said, we're humbled to note the different terms that even they have come to use to identify themselves. So we are humbled to acknowledge that our indigenous comrades who identify as indigenous or identify as native, identify as Indian, identify as Chicano, however they identify, if they are descending from the Western Hemisphere, it is our noble and automatic responsibility to support them and to ensure that they have what they need to fight in this struggle. And more importantly, it's more so about us building up the ideology and the consciousness of understanding that if we are egotistical enough to say that this is not our fight, which if you're a colonized person, that statement doesn't make sense by itself. But if you are egotistical enough to say that it's not your fight, then that means that you truly don't understand that African people are no more safe than any other poor colonized person or any other poor person, any other poor differently abled person, any poor non-male person. Every single poor person that also has another descriptor after the word poor, meaning if you are not supporting the capitalist system and you are not surviving in the capitalist system, I'll say, because you have copious amounts of wealth, then you are in danger. And the sooner that we recognize that and the sooner that we realize that, the sooner it'll start to make more sense for us to combat arms and to come together. The sooner it'll start to make sense that we don't really have the option of saying, well, that doesn't apply to me. That's a privileged statement to even say that. How could you even say that? Because that would make the argument that you don't think it applies to you. But in actuality, that means that you're next if you haven't already been attacked. That's what that means. Because you're not in a position for people to care about you. You don't have enough power in this world for that to be the case. So that's not really wise to go about believing that myth, because that's exactly what it is. It's a myth. It is not based on truth. It is not based on fact. And you are under attack, and you should be prepared, and you should be ready. You should always be ready because they are coming. If they are not already here, they are coming. So now we can start to break down what the connection of African folks and indigenous people, what that has looked like, right? So in this country, there are so many primary exploited communities that have been ravished and terrorized to build this empire. We could start with the obvious of stealing the indigenous people's lands. We could also start with the obvious of stealing African people from the continent of Africa, kidnapping them. Um, I can't think of the other word now, but besides kidnapping, abducting African people against their will, against their consent, and taking them from their cultural, socioeconomic, familial ways of life, their psychological ways of life, their mental ways of life, their spiritual ways of life, stealing all of that from them, stripping them down to nothing, and truly colonizing them in the best definition that we could even think of to give. And using both of those groups of people to build this capitalist empire. I think one of the things I miss most about Memphis is the Civil Rights Museum. And as you walk in, the very first room, I've said this before, has, the recording of drums playing. And it has all these different um, not statues, but all these different entities that you can walk up to. Some that are actual artifacts that are in, glass cases. They have things on the ground that you can look at, and there's maps on the ground that you can follow to see exactly how the transatlantic slave trade took place. And then they have different statues to the far right where you can actually see what it was like for our enslaved African ancestors to have those chains around their necks, around their ankles, around their wrist, right? And so I think what I love most about that room is there is a saying as soon as you walk to the center of the room and just slightly to the right that just basically says it is very clear from an evidence based standpoint that America was established and built off the backs of enslaved Africans. And we talked about how the insurance companies got their start from that. We talked about how Master Lock was already existing, but they were highly promoted and popularized with the shackle creation, right? We talked about banking industries, how they established themselves from the enslavement of African people. So, how we navigate and understand this world today from an insurance standpoint, from a banking standpoint, from buying other items that have then been produced from Masterlock and the companies that Masterlock now owns, right? All of that has been a contributing factor to the exploited labor of African people. But you can't look at the exploited labor of African people unless you're looking at the location in which they are on, which would mean that you're exploiting the labor of African and indigenous people. And also, to this piece about stealing land from the indigenous people, not to mention the mass genocide, not to mention the distrust and the harm, not to mention the thievery, not to mention the sexual assaults on both groups of people, not to mention the disease and outbreak, the illnesses that were brought, the disrespect for humanity, and the disregard for public health, right? Like all of these things when it comes to what is happening with our indigenous comrades and what has been happening, right? And so then we think about that and how it's connected to African and indigenous people and how we have to show for our suffering. And in doing that, we're sharing the same rundown when it comes to how impoverished we are, when it comes to the disrespect and the dehumanization that we experience in the world that is put on us and put upon us. We go through that daily, but yet we are blamed for everything that has happened. We are blamed for why, things are what they are, and we're blamed that we're not doing enough. We're blamed that we are lazy. We're blamed that we don't work hard enough. We're blamed that we get all the jobs and things of that. And I think that, if we really break a lot of that down, it's problematic if we are taking that position ourselves, which is why you need to dig deeper into really thinking about how all of this is by design. Because if they have propagandized us enough to think about how we need to blame each other or each group, right? Then that means that we can't focus too much on the actual person who is facilitating this puppeteer show, if you will. And by person, I mean any person who is in so much power and control that they get to determine how this nation is ran. That's what I'm talking about. I don't just mean the POTUS. I mean all the people who get to decide what kind of cars you and I are going to drive 3 or 4 years from now. All the people who get to decide how money is going to be produced 5 or 6 years from now. Those kind of people who we'll never ever see, we'll never ever know their names, we'll never even know how they exist. But they know everything there is to know about us because that's what control looks like. That's what power looks like. And so that is a very important position to take because really what it comes down to is you are doing the oppressor's work for them by attacking somebody else who has no power to change the conditions. When in actuality, the two of you should be bringing your forces together to attack the real people who are in control. Our communities can decide to continue to disrespect one another. But the only beneficiaries of this are, in fact, the capitalist system, which are our enemies, as I said. And so this is really what it comes down to is understanding how classic this picture is in this slide. Understanding that it shouldn't even be a question. We should already be breaking down how much we understand this. If you were with us last weekend, then you tuned in and you know that we were talking about how the civil rights movement, specifically, Kwame Ture and the work of other folks with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and we could think of so many other examples of organizations, but that error, I'm saying, that civil rights error, if you will, that was all about promoting indignities and injustices among African people, yes, through the Black Power movement, yes. But it was also a seminar that focused on how, because the intention was to celebrate and to promote the injustices and indignities of African people, other groups automatically by default benefited from that work. Other groups, whether it's differently abled, whether it's queer identifying folks, if it's non male folks, I'm thinking about the civil rights era and how that kind of gave rise to the suffrage movement and things of that nature. And it's always crazy to me when I read Angela Davis's book. I'm sure you can help me with the title if I mix it up, but I think it's called Women, Race, and Class. I don't think it's called Class and Race, but it might be. Anywho, Angela talks about how, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and, the other European women that I can't think of right now, Lucretia Moss, those folks were so big on fighting for rights of non-male people, but they specifically were fighting for rights of non-male people that were European. So it would take Sojourner Truth, it would take even Frederick Douglass to some extent to help convince them to understand. Convince is the wrong word because they were never convinced, but to help them understand that you can't just fight for the rights of European non-male people. We should also be fighting for the rights of other non-male people who are of different races. And so I'm so glad that Angela talks about that in her book because this still is a testament to people questioning whether or not we are fully human to receive honor and respect. And I would argue that again, we do the master's work for them by treating each other as if we are less than. We accept the propaganda. We don't question it. We make assumptions about one another, and we don't even think about how we all got here to begin with. For some of us, excuse me, that means first acknowledging that this is not your land. If you are in fact African, like that's where this is going to come from. That's where that's going to go. Learn what the name of the land is that you are on, because I guarantee you the name you know it by is the colonized name. That is not the actual name of the land. Giving honor to that, acknowledging that, and doing what you can to try to support more indigenous organizations that you know nothing about. Taking an interest in something other than yourself, because as I said, their struggle is very much your struggle. And the more we learn about it now, the better we can be to be in a position to help prevent things from getting worse than what they are. And I would argue, more importantly, we owe it to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. We owe it to them to continue to stand with them because we are in a position where we have some experience with this, especially if we look to our ancestors that were a part of that, civil rights movement, that Black Power movement. We have experience with knowing what it means to resist and to fight the oppressor. So, for those of us that are organized and are very clear about our position, we should continue to do what we're doing. But for those of you that still need convincing, this is why you need to increase your political education. This is why you need to read about anime Pictoire Aquash. This is why you need to do some research and understand what the American Indian movement has done for the African community. Not to mention that a lot of what the Panthers have done, they echoed from the American Indian movement, and a lot of what the American Indian movement has done, they echoed from the Black Panthers. So this relationship that we're talking about is not a new one, you all. It's not new since you've been around. It has existed, I would argue, since our two paths had to cross in the first place, because we probably understood that in both cases the group of people were being exploited and they did not have agency or autonomy to make their own decisions for what their outcome would look like. So I think if nothing else, we should connect with indigenous people because they are just as oppressed of us, if not more. And from there, then we can start to build a way to end the suffering and to end the oppression. But it's going to start with understanding first why this is a problem and increasing our political education. And if you're not in a position to do that, then maybe you should go back and watch some more of these seminars and decide what kind of book you want to read by an indigenous organizer and start from there. And maybe then you can start to decide what kind of organization you want to join or if you want to join a work study circle. But we can't be ignorant and speak like we know what we're talking about. That is dangerous. You might as well be people in the White House doing that. And more importantly, we have a responsibility to invoke the truth. And by doing that, that means we need to speak with integrity. There's too much ignorance that exists already, and there's too much mistruths. So think about that the next time you speak up and you know you don't know what you're talking about. We actually challenge you to just be comfortable with saying, "Oh, I don't know anything about that. I'll look into that and I'll get back to you." It would make the world so much better. And more importantly, what are we teaching our young folks? If we're fronting like we know everything, when it's okay for us to not know everything because we're on this earth to keep learning. We're on this earth to keep humbling ourselves. I always tell my students life is a classroom. If you choose to take the opportunity to learn, then you'll be able to learn for the rest of your life until you die. But the choice is up to you on how you decide to do that. Ashe.
Thank you very much. And I want to just continue on the point that Shakur was just making by saying, one of the pieces of work that I've really been involved in for the last couple of years has been helping folks organize, to create organizations, right? Helping folks understand, like, how do I develop an organization from scratch, right? And so one of the first things we do when we're going through that process is to advise people you've got to start with organizing a political education process. And I experienced this doing that work as well as orientating people into an all African People's Revolutionary Party work study circles. Same conditions and the same results. And so one of the things I'm explaining in both instances, whether people are attempting to join an AAPRP work study or attempting to start their own organization, is I'm talking to them about the necessity to get used to researching, finding, studying, researching primary sources. And what I come to realize over the last several years is most people have no clue what I'm talking about when I say primary sources. And that speaks to, I would argue, a lot of the problems that we face today. Because if you don't really know what a primary source is, then you're not going to know how to engage in in-depth research. And you're going to think that just you reading something is research when that's not what research is. Just you reading something and you don't even know who produced that something and what their objective was in producing it. You're not doing research, you're being further propagandized by someone else's agenda. Whether you realize that or not is irrelevant. That's still the case. And I remember when I was starting a work study about 10 years ago, and someone in the work study, they didn't understand primary sources, so they brought an article. And it's funny because this person, they hated everything European, they hated everything white. They couldn't stand anything white people did. That's all they wanted to talk about, which is that's not why we're here. So we would constantly redirect them. And when their turn came to come with an article for our world geopolitical section, which is what we do in the APRP, they brought an article criticizing Secretary because they were trying to be contrary, I guess, or I don't know what the hell they were trying to do. But they brought an article criticizing Secretary because, of course, the APRP Secretary is one of our ideologues. As you can see, if you're looking at a camera, I have on a Secretary shirt as we speak. And so this person thought they were being funny or smart or whatever they thought they were doing. And so they brought this article, and I looked at the article. It took me 30 seconds, and I said, "This is not primary source." Well, what do you mean? I said, this is written by this. And I looked up my phone, maybe it was a minute and 30 seconds, looked up on my phone who the author was. And I saw that the author was someone who was closely tied with the French government. Well, anybody affiliated with the French government is never going to have anything positive to say about Secretary. Any of us who know the history of Guinea and Secretary know that off the bat. So I explained this to this person. Of course, all this went over their head and they thought I was picking on them and all this nonsense. So this is the reality that we have to deal with, right? So that's why we constantly come back to this question of study, comprehensive study, because if you don't know what primary sources are, research skills, the approach that would demonstrate research skills is you would go and you would look at what is the definition of the word primary, and you look at the words that define primary. Then you take each of those words, what is the definition of those words? Then you would take the words that define the words that define, and then you would research the definition of those words. And then in the course of this process, you would develop enough evidence for you to be able to say, okay, this makes sense logically because it follows this line of reasoning. And now you're coming to the point where you can begin to figure things out in a comprehensive and objective manner. And y'all know, just the way I just explained this, I lost a whole lot of people. You don't know how to do that. And I'm not criticizing you or talking bad about you if you don't know how to do it, but we have to recognize that so that we can correct the problem. We can't just keep pretending like because you watch something on capitalist news and you acting like you've done study that's legitimate. It's not legitimate. So let's start by keeping that in mind and talking about sitting out what? What are we talking about? And like Shakura talked about, conscious African people have to see these mass deportations of indigenous people as simply the first salvo that this backward ass government is engaging in its effort to completely Europeanize this country. That's what this is about. This is not just about attacking indigenous people and then everything will go back to normal and you'll be able to experience quiet racism on a comfortable level every day again. No, this is about a process of normalizing white supremacy. I don't even use the term white nationalism. No, because that further entrenches the backward concept that nationalism is 100% bad, and that's not true. So I rather say white supremacy, the system that upholds European capitalism. That's what it is. So that's what these deportations are. And as conscious African people, we should have enough vision to recognize that once they get through with them, they're coming for us. They're simply attempting to go to the lowest hanging fruit, the so-called illegal aliens, quote unquote. I hate saying that term, but those are the people who most people, even a lot of our people, are least likely to uh, defend. So obviously they would go towards them. But we are not aware of what's going on. So we don't know that they're targeting Africans who have come here through immigration as well. And here in Sacramento, I do a lot of security work and anti fascist work. So I've come in contact with many African families from the Caribbean, from the continent who were facing deportation. I know these people. I've talked to them. I know what their situation is. I know what they're dealing with. So if you understand what's happening right now, that they're going to indigenous people's houses, people who were born and raised in this country, and they're saying, okay, you have illegal people, quote unquote, staying with you, and they're using that lie as a justification to ram the doors down of these people born and raised in the US who are working, paying taxes, and you know that's happening to them. I mean, even the capitalist newspapers are reporting that this is happening to them. Are you so goddamn stupid that you don't think that they're going to do the same thing to us? You think that the fact you're born in this backward cesspool country is going to protect you when they start saying next that the problem is African immigrants? You think they're going to see a difference? You don't have enough sense to know that when the police pull you over, if you're born outside of the US or if you're born in the US, that doesn't make a damn bit of difference to them. They're going to try to do what they can to suppress and oppress you. So we don't have enough sense to see that. I mean, I think most of us do. It's just the clouds are so thick that we're not thinking about it clearly, right? Africans and Asians are being subjected to mass deportations too. They're trying to whitenize this country. That's what their whole agenda. The man said it. They said it. All the people around him said it. Steve Miller or whatever the hell, I don't know, whatever the hell those crackers' names are. They've all said what their agenda is. There's no confusion about it. So no conscious African is going to be confused enough to misunderstand Dr. Martin Luther King's statement. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. You can't see somebody being oppressed down the street and say, well, I'm going to sit this out. And the fact that you do that makes your situation untenable and unsafe. Just objectively, that's true. That's what Dr. King was trying to say when he said that. So that's important that we understand that. The next thing is if you want to talk about Los Angeles and the truth about what happened there, again, you got to understand what's happening. The reason why people went off in LA is because they were doing all these raids at people's jobs and at their houses. People who were born and raised here. I'm not talking about people that immigrated here and gained citizenship, them too. But they were going to people who were born and raised here just like you were and raiding their houses. I told you they have a quota. 3,000 people. Look it up if you don't believe me. ICE has a quota. They have to get 3,000 people. So they're trying to be creative. They're going to houses people now. Low hanging fruit again. They're going to whoever they can get that is not going to be able to prove that they were born and raised here, or at least it'll be difficult for them to prove that. Or at least it will be easy for them to dismiss their ability to prove that. Whatever these criminals do, that's what they're doing. And so they're going to these folks' houses, they're harassing them, they're detaining people who were born and raised here. This is, again, even the capitalist media, even Fox News is acknowledging that this is happening. So if you understand that, of course, people are going to rise up in righteous indignation against that. And if you understand it, you know, as an African, if you look at our experience in this country, you know you're not safe if that's what they're doing to anybody else. You know they're coming for you. I mean, you have to be what Malcolm X called a complete house slave to not understand that. There's no other way to say that. So you got to understand the systemic sabotage that's happening against these righteous protests as well. That's another element. A lot of these images that people are looking at that are showing destruction, they're not even happening right now. They're things that happened 10, 20 years ago. But we don't have any knowledge of history, so they show us something and they believe it. When that cracker Trump had a meeting with Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of Azania, or what you call by the colonial name South Africa, a couple of weeks ago at the White House, he was talking about this genocide against these white farmers in quote unquote South Africa. There's no such thing. Nothing is happening to them. There's been 20 Europeans killed in land conflicts in Azania over the last 30 years. That's not even one person a year. There have been thousands of Africans killed in similar conflicts. So there's no white genocide. That's a damn lie. But this is what they're promoting because they're trying to justify. They brought these white people here from so-called South Africa. They're trying to Europeanize this country. You got to pay attention and decipher what the hell's going on. These people are worried that they're going to be wiped out in this country. Their numbers are dwindling compared to everyone else. This is what they're talking about when they talk about we got to save their country. That's what they're saying. We got to make sure this country is white. That's what they're saying. And it's not, this is not about saying, well, it's white people against everyone else. Because when people say white, really what they're saying is we got to sustain the capitalist system, whether they know it or not. That's what they're saying. That's what they're saying. That's what they're protecting. They're not protecting white people because 66% of the people on public assistance are white in this country. So clearly, capitalism is not protecting white people. That's not even that's not even an argument that makes sense to say that. So, but it is, capitalism does use white supremacy to lift white people up against the rest of us. That's how capitalism sustains itself. That's why Lyndon Johnson said, if you want to keep the white man in your back pocket, just keep telling him he's better than the Negro. That's the strategy. It's happened so long, they have a name for it, the Southern strategy that they do. So this is what they're doing. So this is not anything that's is unknown to those of us who know what's going on. So they're coming after all of our communities. That's what they're doing. And the dishonest talking points are flowing. Well, why are they tearing up their? I mean, these people are so stupid, and it's a lot of us saying this. So dumb that we can't even think of the same thing that we were saying 60 years ago. I mean, if you live with someone 60 years, you would say, damn, you sure are stupid. I used to say to my sister, bless her soul, and she rest in power. But I used to say to her, you haven't had a new idea in 5 years. You say the same backward stuff to me all the time. We say that love, she'd laugh, you know. But my point is that you, to her, is that you're not studying anything. So you just regurgitating the same nonsense over and over. None of these things you're saying came from you. None of these things you even developed an understanding of. So this is what's important. The same backward tired talking points. You're burning up your own communities. Malcolm X obliterated that stupid argument in 1964. 61 years ago, when he said the reason why people in poor communities burn up that neighborhood is because they don't own anything in those communities. That's not their community. They don't own anything. All the institutions in those communities are used against them. The grocery stores overcharge them for uh, uh, substandard goods. That's not what happens if it was their community. The places they live are substandard and broken down and overcharged for rent. That's not what happens when it's your community. The police treat them like they're criminals for everything they do in life. That's not what happens when that's your community. So this is what Malcolm was trying to explain 61 years ago. So when the people rise up and resist, they go against the symbols of the system that's oppressing them. And y'all know that's true. That's why when I was in LA years ago after the 92 rebellion, I went in someplace that clearly was not African owned because nobody in there was speaking English and they all over the place they had black owned because they understood that they were trying to make sure the African people in South LA, because that's where I was, knew that we are not a part of the power structure. That was their objective, right? So that's true, that you're saying they're saying that what Malcolm was saying is that they're attacking the symbols of power against them. That's why they burn police cars. Why else would you think they do that? But you got to think about it deeper. These people, well, why are they? I saw a Negro on social media the other day. Why are they burning Teslas? I thought the left supported electric cars. And if I had his phone number, I would have called him up and said, yes, COON, how are you today? I'm calling you to tell you that nobody's burning Nissan Leafs or Priuses. They're burning Teslas. It's a political statement against Elon Musk. It's not even against electric cars, but you're so goddamn stupid. You don't even have sense enough to think about it deep enough to understand. You don't see no Nissan Leaf electric cars burning. You don't even know what a Nissan Leaf was until I just told you. So this is what Malcolm was talking about 61 years ago. And you can't even say that urban rebellions served no purpose because After that LA rebellion, Oprah Winfrey took her bourgeoisie ass over into South LA to film one of her shows when she had her talk show. And she's in there and she's condescendingly talking to all the people. What good did it do to burn down your community? And she said that to a young African, a teenage African in the audience there on the show. You can look at the shows on YouTube. You can look at it. And he said, it got you here. So and she couldn't say nothing. She couldn't say nothing when he said that to her because the whole point is that nobody's listening to us. We're being oppressed by these police. That's why people rose up. And he said the fact that we burned the city down and got your bourgeoisie black ass here to film a show. So obviously the rebellion served some purpose, right? So understand that thinking. That's mass thinking, not bourgeoisie thinking. So again, if the government is harassing people and they have these quote unquote citizens that are being harassed, why do Africans believe at any point that this is not going to also happen to us? Why do we think that? Right? The issues here and the reason why there's so much confusion is the question of disorganization and opportunism, right? Disorganization and opportunism, right? The problem with social media, YouTube PhDs, is similar to what Malcolm X also said about celebrities when he was doing a debate at UC Berkeley in 1962. And they brought up the fact that at that time, people like Jackie Robinson, the baseball player, they would always run to Jackie Robinson, and Jackie Robinson said, well, Malcolm X is a criminal. Malcolm served those all those years in prison in the 40s and 50s. And so Jackie Robinson said he's a criminal. Why are people following a criminal? And they said that to Malcolm during this debate. And he laughed and he said, well, these people are not leaders because they said this is what black leaders are saying about you. And Malcolm said these people are not leaders. These are clowns and buffoons and jesters and entertainers and ball players, trumpet players. And he said, show me in the white community where an entertainer is a leader. Show me in the white community where a ball player is a leader in the white community. And he said, these people are not leaders of our people. They're people who were made celebrities by the white man, and they say whatever they know the white man wants them to say. And that's 100% true. Yeah. Whether you're talking about Snoop Dogg, Jay-Z, Beyond, these are celebrities. You can't depend on celebrities. They're there to make money. They have sold the culture to make money. So they're not people who have spent one day engaged in our African liberation struggle. So why they if I wanted to make a hip hop song and I wanted to know how to do lyrics, then yeah, I'm gonna go to Kanye West and Jay-Z and Snoop Dogg, and I'm gonna study them and I'm gonna understand how to Ice Cube. I'm gonna learn how to do the craft the way they do. But African liberation, I'm gonna listen to what the hell do they know about that? I'm not gonna and you're a damn fool if you listen to them. You got all these organizations who engage and struggle for our people every day, and you go to some celebrity who's never belonged to an organization fighting for African liberation 5 seconds of their entire life, and you want to make that make sense to us. It doesn't make any sense at all. So this is what we're saying needs to be addressed because just like celebrities, these YouTube PhDs on social media, these people are not involved in any day-to-day organizing work. And we know this is true. And the reason why we know this is true, all you got to do is look at how they look at things. They'll say things like, well, indigenous people or Latinos or Hispanics or whatever term they're using, they've never been there for us. And anybody that knows our history knows how stupid that statement is. You know nothing about the maroon communities. The maroon communities organized to fight against the colonizers hundreds of years ago. The Qualimbos that still exist today in countries like Brazil. These are communities made up of African people and indigenous people in the Western Hemisphere. And they were organized to defend our communities against these colonizing terrorists. They were organized to defend our communities against these slave patrols. This is why they existed. That's why, you see these dumbass Negroes showing pictures of Africans or indigenous people who look African. So that proves we have been here thousands of years. No, fool, that doesn't prove that. That proves that we have a long-standing relationship with these people fighting against oppression. That's what that means. Any people who are forced together by social conditions are going to intermix. And after a while, they're going to develop these similar physical characteristics. I mean, that's just basic. What is it? That's just basic biology, right? That's not like God. It's so strange how dumb this stuff becomes. How much this dumb stuff becomes normalized because we don't read, we don't study, and so we don't know. So we're vomiting these capitalist talking points, and these folks can never properly articulate what African people should be doing beyond bourgeoisie elections. If you look at these people on YouTube, like this picture on the screen here, there's actually argument out here. We did our job. We voted for Kamala Harris. You didn't. That's not a job. You didn't do anything. You didn't engage in any struggle. Voting in a bourgeoisie election is not struggling for our people. Let's cut that nonsense. Put that to bed right now. You are not struggling for our people's liberation because you voted in an election controlled by the capitalist system, the system that oppresses our people. You are not doing liberation work for our people because you voted for a woman who has locked up more African people than probably anybody else, right? Or at least she's up there among the top five in this country for locking up our people because that's how she made her career. And you running around talking about you did your job to support our people, supporting someone like that. Someone who uh, got on TV, put her face in the camera last July when she announced that she was taking over for that old decrepit cat cracker that was in office. And she got up there and was talking about, let me make this clear. I stand 100% behind our police. Let me make this clear. I stand 100% behind the state of Israel. And someone that puts their face full in the camera to make statements like that, and you're going to tell me that this is someone for our people? You need to go see a therapist immediately. Immediately. And if I was a therapist and you told me that, I wouldn't even take you as a patient because I would know that there's probably no hope for you. I would tell you what the best advice I can give you is go to your house, fill your sink up with scalding water, and stick your head in it. Because that's the best thing you can do for the rest of us is get yourself out the damn way with that kind of confusion. And none of these people, and I mean none of them, are in organizations. Not a single one of them. That's why they talk like that. Because the difference is when you're just an individual, you're not accountable to anything or anybody but yourself. You can say and do whatever the hell you want to do. When you belong to an organization, if you're seriously in the organization, you're going to have to, at least on some level, be accountable to the principles, the work, and the objectives of that organization. So, this is the reason, you all, that this line of we should sit this out, you don't hear anybody from the APRP saying that. Oh, we should sit this out. That's not our struggle. You don't hear anybody from the NAACP saying that. You don't hear anybody from the Black Alliance for Peace saying that, or we should sit it out. You don't hear anybody from the Uhuru movement saying that. You don't hear anybody from the Nation of Islam saying that. You don't hear anybody from the Malcolm X grassroots movement. You don't hear anybody from any African organization saying we should sit that out. The only people saying that are people who are not involved in any organized struggle and can just say and do whatever the hell they want to do. They don't have to think about what they're saying 2 seconds before they say it. They don't have to think about it 2 seconds after they say it. They have no accountability. All they're doing is getting on there, saying things like Malcolm X told us to appeal to the white power structure so that they can get likes and count and clout and get potentialities for income. That's all that's about. It has nothing to do with talking about things in a way that's going to advance our people's struggle. And I'm including all these Negro coons on here that claim to be Pan Africanists or whatever the hell they're claiming to be. If they have no organization, you all, they are not serious about change. I don't care how great they are individually, because even if they're the greatest person who ever lived on the planet Earth, if they have no organization, they're not serious about change unless they can tell you, well, I'm going to completely solve the problem before I die. And if they're going to do that, then they should go ahead and do it. But you know that's not going to happen. So they're not serious about correcting the problem because there's no way they can do it by themselves and they're going to die And so their agenda is obviously something else, selling something, generating income, something else other than liberation. Because the people who are serious about liberation are doing this work every day. They're they're being disrespected every day. They're working their asses off to do this work. You all are not responding to them like you know you should. And they're trying their best, three or four people to do this, and nobody's helping them. Nobody's supporting them. Nobody's sharing their work like you do all these clown celebrities and all these other goddamn fools that you share around social media. You're not doing that with the people who are seriously making this commitment. So they don't have all of this. They don't have time to sit on social media saying stupid ass things. They're trying to organize something. You know, I was sitting out last Monday with another brother that's in work study for the party, and the brother that was is in community movement builders here, and we were talking about how difficult it is to get our people to come out to events.
Mm.
And we just stood on the curb talking about that, you know, for about 30 minutes. And, you know, those two, these are people doing work, right? So we're talking about, but we weren't saying it in a negative sense or pointing any fingers. We were talking about, like, how can we come up with more ways to brainstorm to reach our people? Because we are not responding to that. We're responding to all this nonsense. And so you got to think, if the organizations who are making the sacrifices aren't doing that, it must not have any credibility. Look at what the people showing the most commitment to our struggle are doing, and that will be the best gauge to you for what you should be doing. And so we just want to thank you for joining us. We want to tell you that you should. Last thing we want to say is we are not. APRP is not a protest organization, so don't lie. Don't walk around away from here saying that we told you to go out and go to protest. We don't even go. The only way that we go to protest is to speak, or to, you know, I do a lot of providing events with my sound equipment, or to do security, or sometimes all three of those things I do at the event. But we're not, I don't march in we're not making a demand against the government. We're a revolutionary party. We don't even do events at state capitals and city halls because we're not asking those people for anything. We want to overthrow the system they represent. So we're not telling you to do that, but we're telling you to get involved in organizations that can advance the struggle that we're talking about here, for oppressed people. That's what we're saying. Whatever way you think that should be done. So next week, um, this is only the second time in 5 years we've done this, but we will not be having a show next Sunday. And the reason why is that we have a wonderful family activity plan, and it's time to do family stuff. So we are all looking forward to that. Shakur and I are both participating. So we're going to do that because we want to participate with our families. We're not like a lot of people who claim to be revolutionary, and revolutionaries have to organize people, and you can't even organize in your family. Like you know, and I don't know what kind of revolutionary you are, but we have good relations with our family, so we're going to be with them next week. We will be back 2 Sundays from today, July 6th. We'll be talking about how July 4th keeps us enslaved. So remember that, how July 4th keeps us enslaved. July 6th, no show on June 29th, which is the born day of Kwame Ture. So happy born day of Kwame Ture, June 9th, 29th. We won't be here. We'll be here the following Sunday. The QR code in the upper left hand, the red and white one, has all the APRP programs. Go to the Forward Ever shop. Please do that. Hoodcommunist.org. Please do that and join the AAPRP at aaprp-intl.org. Join the organization. And Burkina Books, become a monthly sponsor. Sponsor as much as you can a month. It's for Burkina Books. It's also Niger Books. This is AAPRP work on the ground in the Sahel region of Africa. So please support that work and buy my book. Tell people about it. Get it in your local library. All you got to do is call the library and say, hey, you should have this. You got this book in there. You should have it in there. You know, do that. That's a serious contribution. We would greatly appreciate it because this is what helps us raise money to support the anti-fascist work that's going on. A guide for organizing defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence. A guide for organizing defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence. Unfortunately, you can only get it on Amazon. I don't want to hear about you don't support Amazon. I'm not supporting Amazon by having my book there. What I'm doing is utilizing a vehicle to print my book and publish it and send it all over the world without it having to come out of my pocket. And I've sold thousands of books. I would not be able to do that without this source. So don't tell me, don't put gas in your car at Shell and then tell me you don't do business with Amazon. That doesn't make, again, that's what individuals say that aren't affiliated with organizations. So do that, support us, forward ever, backwards never. Enjoy the rest of your day.